Hello fam, welcome back to the pod. Today we're going to talk about nutrition for Hyrox, and I think this is going to be part one. At the time that this episode comes out, we're going to be about 8 weeks out from Brizzy Hyrox, and then I'm going to do a part two when it's a little bit closer. So today we're going to look at things that we just want to be thinking about and aware of when we are a few months out from Hyrox, and then in that next episode we can look at the things we want to be thinking about when we're coming into Hyrox week. The first thing I'll say, guys, is if you're not doing Hyrox or interested in Hyrox, first of all, you might not even be here. You might have just skipped this one, but it's cool to even just kind of learn all this stuff because it can be really applicable to other activities or sports. Obviously, if we look at Hyrox, we're looking at that shorter window compared to a lot of other events. So Hyrox is usually like that hour to an hour and a half. Obviously depends if you're doing teams, relay, solo, pro, there's a few things there. Obviously depends how quick you are, how fit you are, but we know we're kind of looking around that 60 to 90 minute window, give or take. And if your times are outside of that, that's totally fine, don't stress. But what I'm getting at there is if you do participate in other gym comps or sports or games or anything that are around that same time frame, a lot of what we talk about today could be applicable here as well. And then even if you're not doing any of those things, obviously if you're here, you probably have somewhat of an interest in nutrition, training, fueling, just all this stuff. And it can just be kind of cool to know. And if you are a regular listener, you know I do tend to go off in a few different directions and you probably learned something that has nothing to do with Hyrox as well. But I will try and keep on topic for the most part today, especially for people that might have stumbled across the pod specifically because of this title. If that is you, welcome. We are going to get into it. The other little thing I'll say is if you're a regular listener, you're probably going to hear a fair bit of stuff today that you've heard in some recent eps about fueling female fitness overall and then looking into fueling running, half marathon, etc. So I apologize if you hear things that you have heard recently, but I'd rather cover it twice than not at all. And episodes like this are really cool because this almost forms like a base convo that we don't really have to have again. If anyone ever asked about nutrition for Hyrox, we can just send them back here. And then that provides a really cool base and foundation. We can go off into other convos and be remember that episode we did about Hyrox? Go back and listen to that one if you need to. So that's my reason and my point for today's episode. But if we get into nutrition for Hyrox, like I said, what we're going to look at today is more so the stuff we want to be thinking about when we do have a few weeks or months till the event and we're really in the training phase and we're building up training, getting ready for Hyrox in a few months' time. Obviously, our first point we want to make here, I make this whenever we're looking at preparing for a performance goal. We don't want to be in a deficit when we do this, guys. We know a calorie deficit is an energy deficit. If we think about someone prepping for Hyrox, we don't want this person to be deficient in energy. And it's cool to think about that on a personal level for yourself. If you are someone who is prepping for Hyrox, have a think about what your training does look like between now and your actual event day. Because we've got people that have done Hyrox a lot and they're really experienced and they're really conditioned to it. And therefore, their training that they're doing in, say, the 2 months before it is just their usual training, right? If you're doing Hyrox multiple times a year and this is your training style and you love it, as you come into an event, yeah, you might be ramping things up a little bit, but you wouldn't be doing a completely different training style or intensity to what you've been doing for the last few months and years, as opposed to someone who is coming into their first ever Hyrox. If that's you, awesome, go off. But if this isn't something that your body's conditioned for, you're probably, and you should be, in a training block that is increasing and building up and progressing so that you are ready for Hyrox when it comes around. And the reason I bring this up and where it kind of relates back to that calorie deficit comment is if you're someone who is working very hard at the moment to get ready for Hyrox and condition your body and progress and build up towards it, that's where we would really want to look and go, does it make sense for me to be in an energy deficit when I do that? Like I always say, no, it doesn't. That wasn't a question. That is a straight up fact. So just important to think about that. As your training intensity and volume builds, you want to make sure your nutrition can build with it and you can fuel that training so you can actually train well and recover well and get the most out of the training so we can minimize injury. Obviously, the more underfueled we are and the more fatigued we are, the more we're going to risk injury. And so we can really give that training and the event our best shot. Whenever we're looking at something like Hyrox or half marathon, sporting goal, anything, most people are doing this because they want to really give it a good shot and do their best. Even if you're not the best, most people want to do their best. And so if we pull that apart, it's do I think I'm going to do my best if I'm deficient in energy? So that's just an important thing to think about. And another little thing I like to point out to people in this position, if they are contemplating putting themselves in a calorie deficit and prepping for Hyrox, If your training is hard and intense right now, I just ask you straight up, do you want to add hunger to that equation? Because obviously we know if we go into a calorie deficit, we're going to have some element of hunger. Do you want to be hungry? Do you want to be doing those sessions when you're hungry? Do you want to be hungry after those sessions when you're trying to recover? Usually that's just a recipe for a bad mood. If someone is training hard and they're hungry, usually they are just cranky. So really just have a think about like how well you want to do this thing and how enjoyable you want the whole process to be. Because fueling it well is going to be the key factor in both of those things. And really that just then comes down to what we've spoken about on the podcast before, being strategic with structuring your year and lining up anything like a calorie deficit if you do have a fat loss goal separately from something like a Hyrox prep block. So you just have to be a little bit smart, think ahead and work out at what times am I going to be prepping for an event like Hyrox and therefore building up my training volume and intensity and wanting to make sure I have the energy and the fuel to do that. And then there might be other times in the year where you aren't prepping for an event and you look at your calendar and you go, there's nothing there. If I do have a fat loss goal, I could schedule it at that time. So that's the first thing we want to be thinking about. And obviously if you're listening in real time and you are going into Brizzy Hyrox, I would really be thinking about that right now. I've got 8 weeks. I want to make sure I'm fueling these 8 weeks, not a hangry, cranky biatch for these 8 weeks. Enough said on that one. Another factor we can look at here is energy availability, but we've spoken about this so much lately. If you don't know much about energy availability, I'd go back and listen to like the last 8 podcasts, I would say. We've spoken about it a lot. But one thing I want to hone in on with that is a concept that we call carb availability. And this is kind of just like another level, or it kind of like branches out from energy availability. And it's exactly what it sounds like. How much carbs are available in the body? How much availability of carbs do we have, if we want to word it that way? And if we think about something like Hyrox, carbs are going to be our best friend. Carbs are our best friend for any event or performance goal. I will die on that hill because carbs are the body's preferred energy source. So we're going into these big training sessions, big training volume, and then going into the event itself. We want to have good carb availability, meaning we want to have a good amount of carbs available for the body to go, hey, we're on here. What can I draw from to give me some energy to get this damn thing done? Awesome. I've got good carb availability. Let's go. So making sure we're not in the deficit and making sure we're actually fueling our training volume at the time is going to be the thing that stops us falling into low energy availability because our overall energy output is being supported. And then if we come over to carb availability, what we're looking at here, we've spoken about this in a few different ways on the podcast before, but never in this way. What we want to look at here is, obviously the body has a minimum amount of protein that we want to make sure we get every day just to fuel recovery and things in the body that require protein. And then we also have a minimum amount of dietary fat that we want to get in every day. And we've spoken about all the reasons for that in the past. If we think about the fact that those things are a minimum, meaning like there's a certain amount that we want to make sure we get, we then want to think about the fact that if carbs are the body's preferred energy source, and I'm going to be doing a fair bit of high volume and high intensity training, we really want to fill the rest of our calories for the day with carbs. So we want to make sure we get enough protein, we get enough dietary fat, we tick off all of our key nutrients like that. But then if we are putting ourselves on a decent overall calorie intake, which we should be for the reasons we just spoke about for the last 5 minutes, we then want to make sure a really decent amount of that intake is coming from carbs because they're going to be the thing that the body uses to fuel all those training sessions and then to fuel the event itself. So that's just a cool thing to think about and be mindful of. And that does kind of segue me into another point I wanted to talk about today. And it almost ties into everything we've just said. As we come into the week of Hyrox, and obviously we'll talk about this a bit more in a few weeks' time, but as we come into that week, I do implement like a mini carb load with my clients. And like I said, we can talk about that a bit more in a few weeks. But the thing I really like to point out to people is if we are going to go into something like Hyrox or any sort of event or performance goal, I think even people who don't know much about this stuff and aren't working with a nutritionist still think about like getting enough carbs in or like doing a little bit of a carb load, like I should have a high carb day or a high carb dinner. Even if you don't even really know why or how much or like the strategy behind any of it, I think it's a common thing for people to think like, oh, well, I'm doing some sort of event, so I should have some meals or foods like that the day before or in the days before, right? The thing that's really important to think about here is if we had spent, let's say, the 8 weeks before that in a calorie deficit and or eating sweet F all and not really getting in many carbs and just not thinking about any of this stuff, it can be a big 180 for the body to be like, I've been on low calories, not really conditioned to eating much carbs, haven't built a big tolerance in my gut to anything like this. Like I said, it is just a 180. It's like, I'm not doing this. Suddenly, race week, I'm getting pumped with all these carbs. And you could compare this to somebody who's like on a really restrictive diet and then just goes out and is like, fuck it, I'm going to eat everything. Pretty quickly, they feel like shit and they physically feel pretty sick. If we bring this back to Hyrox or any sort of similar event, you don't want to do that in the week or the few days before your event. So what we really want to think about here is reverse engineering and thinking, well, if I want to make sure I have good carb availability, first of all, just for all of this training, but also on the day, if I do want to do a mini carb load in a structured way leading into that event, this is just yet another reason that I should make sure I'm consuming good amounts of carbs and calories right now, for the reasons that we just spoke about before, like actually fueling training and everything that's going on right now, but also conditioning the body to tolerate and utilize those things really well so that when we get to race week, the body knows how to do that. And again, it does it really well. You don't want to, like I said, literally pump your system with something for a few days if it hasn't been doing that for months or it hasn't built up for that for months. And then, like I said, you wake up on race morning and you're like, so uncomfortable, so sick, whatever, because your body's like, what the hell is this? Like, we haven't been doing this. So that's why I love to do episodes weeks or months out from events like this, so people can think about that shit now and avoid getting into that position because they've left it too late to think about all those things. And then flowing on from that, something we speak about with any athlete getting ready for any event is that we never want to do anything new on race day. You never want to do anything on race day that you haven't trialed and confirmed works for you in the weeks or months before that. And this is applicable for everything from like overall intake to certain nutrient intakes, fluid protocols, different supplements, carb loads, the types of foods we're consuming as part of the carb load or the race day, etc. Like I said, you want to know that your body can do those things. You've trialed them. Yep, those amounts, those foods, etc. That's all sweet for me, so that you don't do them for the first time in the days before the event or the day of the event and realize, hang on, that isn't sweet for me. My body doesn't respond well to that thing. And I'm finding out when I'm standing at the start line. Right? Like, we can all understand that's not ideal. That's the last thing we want. And so what this means is we want to be thinking about the shit that we might want to do for the event or in the days leading up to the event and trial those things now. And the two specific things I'd be looking at here is a mini carb load and some particular supplements. And this is going to be different depending on the individual. So this is what I work on for individual clients, like working out what specific subs might work for them, what might not. And then when we look at something like a carb load, or in this case, a mini carb load, what exact amounts and what types of food are we including in that? But to give like a little bit of an average summary of what I do for my clients, this is not advice. I would absolutely advise getting this shit calculated by a professional for you. But for my clients, we look at a mini carb load of around like 5 to 7 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight. For some people, we might go a little bit higher if we've carb loaded them for other things or other events and we know they've got a good tolerance and we could do a little bit more, but we don't really need to do much more. If we think about the point of a carb load, it is, like I said before, making sure we've got good carb availability in the body and making sure we've got a good amount of muscle glycogen. So if people don't know, muscle glycogen is just the storage form of carbohydrates. We just want to make sure that those things are essentially like nice and topped up and good enough and full enough to get us through the event. The reason we say a quote mini carb load is because when we do a big carb load for people, we can do up to like 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight. Again, depending on the individual and their event, etc. But usually we're doing that for events like a full marathon or beyond, half Ironman, full Ironman, etc., where the duration of the event is like 3+ hours. So if we come back to Hyrox being like 60 to 90 minutes, we just don't need to be as carb loaded essentially because we're not going to go for as long and therefore hit a point where those muscle glycogen stores and all of our energy stores become really depleted because the event just isn't going to go long enough for that to really kick in for someone. So this is why we say a mini carb load, because it's almost like the mindset of we want to make sure you've got enough. We want to make sure we're not going to run out, but we don't need to be like max glycogen stores because you're not going to go for long enough for us to need to get to that point. And so that's just a cool thing to understand. And then what I would be doing with that information right now is doing a trial run. So again, I would work with someone. This is not advice, this is just information. But if I was working with someone, or the girls that I am working with, I actually have a lot of girls doing Brizzy Hyrox. I think it's a huge event this year. All the Hyrox are huge events now. But for a lot of my girls doing that, if we haven't carb loaded them for something before, like if they're a new client or this is their first event like this, we will do a trial carb load in the weeks or months before it. So throughout February or early March, we would want to do a trial carb load. You always want to do this, in my opinion, with enough time that if something didn't go right, you could trial it again. So if we do a trial carb load, let's say middle of Feb or end of Feb, and maybe we realize like there was a certain food that didn't work for that person, or the amount maybe didn't work for that person. We go back, we tweak it, we have a look at what that was, and then I would go, yep, okay, cool, I think we need to change this. Let's trial it again early March, mid-March, etc. Brizzy Hyrox, if people don't know, is like second week of April, I think, just after Easter. So you're doing this shit with enough time to trial it, see what worked, see what didn't, trial again if needed, and then know that you've got your plan going into that event. And again, know that you're not going to risk GI discomfort or feeling bloated, feeling sick, anything like that, the day before or the day of the event where you really want to perform well. And on the same note, we would want to do something pretty similar with actual like pre-event nutrition. The hard thing about Hyrox is you don't know your time. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the episode closer to the event in our part 2 Hyrox ep. But what exactly we do before the event is obviously going to depend on what time you draw. But ideally, unless you're like literally competing at the crack of dawn, which I feel like they're going to start doing now because the events are so busy. But if we've got, let's say, like a 4-hour window before the event, I would want to make sure we had a really decent carb meal, let's say like 3 hours out, and then I would want to do a carb top up like 60 minutes out. So again, that's something I would trial for the individual, like exactly how much, what is in these meals, what does that look like for you? And you're wanting to trial that in a scenario when you're then going to go into a pretty intense training session, because really what we're looking at there is, what could we comfortably get in, and / was it comfortable? Did everything feel good? And how did we perform? And we're only going to know that if we can go into a session that's somewhat similar to Hyrox. So I would be thinking about setting that up for a big session you've got scheduled throughout March. And again, it's probably something that you're going to do, like let's say, I know a lot of people do their big sessions on the weekend. So you're maybe doing like a big session on a Sunday. So you use your Sunday morning to practice that. You go into your sesh. If something did or didn't work, or you want to play around with it, you want to be able to do that maybe the next week or the week after. So again, give yourself the time. And then the other thing I mentioned there that we'd want to just trial or get clear on, like our specific protocols and our specific plan, is a few supplements. So these will be different depending on the individual, but things that I look at for people going into Hyrox are things like caffeine, creatine, beta-alanine, beetroot shots, maybe like tart cherry is something I'm going to use for Shaq and maybe some of my other clients. So I would be doing a bit of research or booking in with myself so we can talk about this for you, but doing a bit of research to find out like if there's some of those you should be using or shouldn't be using, and then if so, what is the dosage, what is the timing, what does all that look like? And again, ideally doing a little bit of a trial run of those things, especially things that you haven't used before. Because again, you just want to make sure what's actually going to work for you. You want to be able to get to race week and go, I've got my plan for the few days before and the day of, and there's nothing on this plan that I'm looking at and going, I don't actually know how that's going to work for me. That is the last thing we want with any event, any performance goals. So we always want to reverse engineer and make sure we give ourselves enough time to play around with all these things. And ideally, we want to play around with them separately, because you don't want to trial multiple things in the same session or on the same day. And let's say you do get a bit of GI discomfort, then you're left in a position where you're like, I don't know what caused it. I tried 2 new supplements and a carb load. Something didn't go right. I'm not feeling too good, but I don't know what it was. So again, this is just another example of why we want to make sure we have enough time to actually do those things one at a time, see how it works for you, tick it off, move on to the next thing, and continue to formulate your plan as you come into that event. And before we wrap up this episode, I feel like we should just summarize these things, because if we think about someone who didn't do any of this, right? I'm going to play out like the worst case scenario right now. Let's say you're like, I don't care what Ruby says. This is the thing. People are like, I love listening to Rubes, but I'm not going to do what she says, right? That's fine. Go off, but also good luck. But let's say someone doesn't listen. They go into like a 2-month Hyrox prep throughout Feb and March. They're on low calories. So we're under fueling, meaning training is shitty, recovery is shitty. We're risking injury. We're probably cranky. So that's a really fun 2 months. I don't know why anyone would want to sign up for that, right? But that's the worst case scenario there. If you then get to race week, and side note, if you're listening in real time and we're talking about Brizzy Hyrox, Easter is literally the weekend before Hyrox. I'm pretty sure Shaq's Hyrox event is on the Thursday. So Easter is like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then he's Hyroxing 3 days later on Thursday, right? So let's just side note for a second here and think about if someone was to go on a really restrictive, shitty, miserable diet while they're trying to do all this Hyrox prep. I reckon most people in that position would be so cranky they'd get to Easter weekend and they'd eat their body weight in chocolate, right? So now you've got this whole separate issue of a very uncomfortable sugar-filled stomach because it wasn't ready for it because you've been on this shitty diet for 8 weeks. You're coming out of a sugar coma, an Easter egg coma, into what you were like thinking, oh, I should do a bit of a carb load and I should start getting some sups into me, but I'm still trying to get all these Easter eggs out of me, even if you don't do the Easter egg thing, right? But I think that was just worth mentioning because that could just be another nail in the coffin. But even if you weren't to dabble in the Easter egg thing, even if you were to just restrict your calories and your overall intake in the lead up to the event, you are going to risk really shitty training, performance, and recovery happening for your whole Hyrox prep. But then if you also come into that week of the event and you're like, okay, I should dabble in a bit of a carb load. I'm going to trial some of these sups I've been hearing about. And again, if one of those sups doesn't sit right with you and you suddenly start hitting your system with carbs in amounts that it hasn't had for ages, or carb types or foods that you haven't had for ages, and something doesn't agree with you, you wake up on race day and you're like, wow, I just had a really cranky, shitty 2 months. And now I'm feeling very sick and very uncomfortable. And I'm going into this event that I was looking forward to and I've been hyping up. Like, this has been the thing that I'm working towards. But then when I look at the actual process and the event itself, it's all become pretty unenjoyable for all of these reasons. So that's why I love to do episodes in advance and just really bring awareness to all of these things, because the alternative to that is fueling that training well, enjoying the hell out of it. Like, let's not forget we sign up to these things voluntarily, right? It's supposed to be for enjoyment. It's supposed to enhance your life. So you want to enjoy that training. You want to feel like you're fueling it well. And like, yes, the training is going to be hard and you're going to feel like you're getting your ass kicked, but it's in that like grinding, I love this kind of way. And then if we're like replenishing after our session, so we're recovering well, we're going back, we're doing it again. Overall, like, people who love this shit, right? So you want to love that time. And then you come into the week and you're like, yep, I've played around with my pre-race stuff, my carb loads, my sups, etc. So I know what my plan is. I'm feeling really confident, really good going into this event and really fueled, really well fueled. So they are all the things I'd be thinking about right now for those reasons. And obviously, guys, like I said, this is literally the shit that I do with my clients every day. So if you are thinking, wow, I need Rubes to do all this for me, eatlikeruby.com.au, you know where to find me. Otherwise, stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to drop it, I think, pretty close to the event, because we're going to focus more on like how to structure nutrition during the week and the day of the event, etc. So I will be back then. In the meantime, we do have an episode dropping next week, which is part 2 for our running gals, or the people getting ready for running events this year. I actually feel like a lot of the stuff we spoke about today, we speak about in that episode as well. I have already recorded it. So a little bit of crossover, but just cool to kind of hear it again and reiterate it and piece it all together. Whether you're doing one of these events, like you're just doing Hyrox or you're just doing running, or it is so common, I think nearly every one of my clients that's doing Hyrox is doing either a half or a full marathon this year. So there is so much crossover, guys. So definitely worth still listening. And I feel like this is just like anything else we speak about on the podcast, where people are like, oh yeah, I had to hear you say that like 10 times before I started to implement it, Rubes. So that's fine. You guys are lucky. I love to yap. You guys love to hear it. So we'll be back next week with that episode, and then plenty more to come over the coming weeks for the performance gals, but also for the gym gals as well.
The Eat Like Ruby podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or dietary advice. The advice given in this episode is general in nature and should not be used to treat any medical conditions, health conditions, illnesses, injuries, and/or any nutrition-related conditions, deficiencies, or similar. This podcast is not to be used as or in place of medical advice or dietary advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before implementing any of the advice, information, or protocols discussed in this episode.